Okay. So today's portion is Vayakhel, but we're going to study today Parashas Parah, which is the passage of the Torah that deals with, it comes from Parashas Chukas, but it deals with the red heifer. And the reason why we're going to study that is because it's read after Parashas Zachor as one of the four additional portions that we read. Now, this is read in the weeks leading up to Shabbos Mevorchim, which is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Shabbos Mevorchim for Rosh Chodesh Nisan. The weeks leading up to the blessing of Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And the reason is because Parashas Parah discusses the purification process, how Bnei Israel became pure, because in order to bring the Korban Pesach, you need to be purified. Paschal lamb was brought on the 14th of Nisan, and in order to be purified, everyone who had come in contact with a dead body would be unable to participate in the ritual. So you had to go through this process of taking the ashes of the red heifer, sprinkling it on the person who was being purified on the third day, and then again on the seventh day. And then you'd be able to, after going to the mikveh, you'd be able to be purified enough to be able to partake of the Paschal lamb. And so therefore it became a practice to read this passage in advance of the holiday of Pesach, in advance of Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So we're reminding ourselves. Now, usually this was just theoretical, but this year I actually saw for myself the red heifers that they're raising in Israel. They have now 5 red heifers that I visited. 3 of them are considered kosher red heifers. 3 of them are considered kosher red heifers. I saw them with my own eyes. And first of all, I see Sheldon has joined us. Welcome back, Sheldon. We missed you. We're very happy you're here to add to our Torah study. You lift us up when we see you on the Torah group. Baruch Hashem, Sheldon. Anyway, so I saw these red heifers with my own eyes, and if anybody's going to Israel and you want to be able to see them, text me privately, and I'll tell you how to see them. You keep them under a strict security presence, because obviously it's could be viewed as apocalyptic. But I saw these red heifers with my own eyes, and so this year the passage takes on even more meaning. Now, what I like to do as part of our Torah study today is we've been studying in the afternoon the passage of the red heifer with Rashi's explanation. What I like to do now is to read a part of that Rashi, which we did not get to in our afternoon studies, which is the Midrash of Rabbi Moshe Darshan that Rashi cites, which is a symbolic reading of this passage. Then I like to share some Hasidic explanations of the red heifer. But first, let me just summarize what one has to do. What is this whole ritual of the red heifer called the Parah Adumah? And the ritual of the red heifer is that God says to Moshe and to Aaron that they're supposed to take a red heifer. Who's the one who's supposed to take it? The deputy. The mitzvah is for the deputy Kohen Gadol, Elazar, was supposed to take this red heifer, take it outside of the camp. That this was not a sacrifice brought in the temple. It was supposed to be brought outside the camp on Mount Olives in temple times and in the wilderness outside of the camp, and looking towards the Mishkan. And then one was supposed to slaughter the red heifer in front of the deputy, in front of Elazar the Kohen, and it would be burnt with its, excuse me for a second, with its skin, its flesh and blood, and all its waste, completely burnt. This red heifer is completely burnt outside of the temple, not in the temple. It's not a sacrifice. And then the Kohen takes some cedar wood while the fire is burning. He takes some cedar wood and hyssop and crimson thread and casts it into the pyre of fire that's burning. So again, what's burning? A red heifer, a cedar wood, a hyssop, crimson thread. Then this Kohen who did all this, he has to wash his garments and immerse because he himself became tamei. And one who burns it also has to wash his garments. Meaning to say, this is the riddle. This is the biggest riddle of the red heifer. And this is why King Solomon said, I understand all the laws of the Torah except for this, because the people who are involved in this process, they themselves become tamei. While this process, when the ashes are sprinkled on others, the people who the process is done to become pure, while the people who are doing the process, they themselves become tamei. And so that's the riddle. If this process is so pure, why do the people who are doing it themselves become ritually impure? And so now the people who are doing it, they become ritually impure to a lesser extent than the people who they purify. But so they purify them and they become a little bit impure. And then he takes the ashes, and the children of Israel were supposed to wash these ashes for the generations. The tradition is that there were 9 red heifers in history, but from the ashes of the red heifer of Moses, a little bit was mixed in with all the other 9, and the 10th one will be in the time of the Mashiach. Right now, we could take the 10th one already. We have it. We're just waiting. I'm not sure what they're waiting for because they could do it right now. There are certain requirements that maybe they're not sure who a Kohen is. They have to appoint a deputy Kohen. I don't know, but they have not. They could theoretically do the 10th one today. They could just be doing it right now. And it's certainly possible that they'll do it. I mean, if there was ever a time in human history where they might do the red heifer, I think right now would be that time where I think that the current administration in the White House probably wouldn't mind if the Israeli government did it. And the Israeli government is itself pretty much sympathetic to this messianic movement amongst the settler population of Israel. So if there was ever a time, I would not be surprised if they did it this year. They just said, we're going to slaughter the red heifer and sprinkle its ashes and start purifying people. Problem is that where would they go from there? Because bringing the Paschal Lamb would create a whole another set of problems. But even bringing the Paschal Lamb is also very doable. It's very doable today. The only reason why we don't do it is for political purposes. But all you need to do is you just need to take a lamb to the place, once you're purified, you take the lamb to the place where the altar used to be. You don't need to rebuild the temple. You don't need to even put in an altar. You just need to take a lamb to the place where the altar was. And every year on the eve of Pesach, people tried to bring a little lamb up to the Temple Mount, and the police stopped them. There are people who are ready to do it. And also, unlike sacrifices in general, which people get, people like Jeffrey was quoting from the Maimonides class that we have on Wednesday nights, the Guide to the Perplexed, that Maimonides was very skeptical about sacrifices. But the Paschal Lamb is not really a sacrifice because people are eating. We have to eat the Paschal Lamb. So it's basically, like a barbecue that people are preparing. So all of this is plausible today. It's not like certain things which we know we'll never do again, like the destruction of the Canaanites and Amalekites. Those things will never happen because we lost who those people are. But these things I could see happening. Anyway, so they gather the ashes and they sprinkle them. They sprinkle them on day 3 and day 7, and this will be purification of the person who has become ritually impure, who has become tamei from touching a dead body. And about all these things, Solomon said, I understand all the laws except for this one. And now let me just say, Rashi gave some explanations of this through the Rashi gives explanation. Rashi gives an explanation. Now, even though Rashi gives an explanation, he himself writes about this law in the first Rashi. He says that this mitzvah is called a chok. A chok means a law without explanation. And he says, Ma tam yeshba, what reason is it? He says, Gezerah hi milfanai. It's a decree from before me. and you have no permission to literally reflect on it, but also meaning to question it. So even though Rashi says you have no permission to question it or to reflect upon it, he himself gives an explanation, which is a reflection on it. But before we go into this explanation, I think that this is one of the most important ideas of our faith, that we have to recognize. We have to recognize that there are certain commandments which we have no permission to reflect upon them. Commandments that seem illogical. That Maimonides in the Guide to the Perplexed tries to explain everything, as Jeffrey's studying, and everybody's welcome to study that on Wednesday night. But Rashi's approach, and this approach says, no, we're not allowed to say we understand the entire corpus of our faith. It's just not. It's not something that we're allowed to do. We have to recognize that within our faith there will be parts which we don't understand, that we won't be able to understand everything. This is an important principle of our faith. So now let's go to the Rashi's explanations of this ritual called the red heifer. So I'll read these Rashi's, which comes at the end of Rashi's commentary. He says the following: "You shall take for yourself that." So, meaning to say, what's the purpose of this? Rashi says, it says in the beginning of this commandment of the red heifer, take for yourself, mishalem, that the Jewish people have to own it. Just like they removed the golden rings for the golden calf from their own money, so they should bring this. This should come from their own property for an atonement, and not from Moshe's personal cow. It has to be the children of Israel have to collectively own this cow. There was a story in the Talmud of somebody who owned this cow and they had to buy it from them. Anybody remember who that was? Did we ever go over that story? We never went over that story. This is the Gemara in Kedushin. This is the story of Dama ben Nesina. He was an idolater who merited to have one of these special cows born. And he was the one who taught us all about honoring the father and mother, because the rabbis came to him, they wanted to buy jewelry for the high priest, for the Kohen Gadol's breastplate, and he refused to sell it because he would have to wake up his father to sell it. And so since he turned down that deal, in honor of his father, he merited that the following year, the rabbis had to come back and purchase the red heifer from him, which was worth a lot of money. So this has to be a communal offering. We see right away Rashi saying it's an atonement for the golden calf, which all the Jewish people or all the men contributed to its purchase. I remember a few years ago there was a story in Lakewood, New Jersey, that there was a Jew who was not a strictly speaking Sabbath observant Jew, but he was very proud of his Yiddishkeit, and he was a farmer, and somehow or other, he just luckily, one of the cows in his flock gave birth to an entirely red heifer. And the people were coming from the nearby Lakewood. All the rabbis were coming to look at his cow, to look at his little baby cow, and they were saying, "Wow, it looks like it's a kosher red heifer." And people offered him over $1 million for it. And he said, I wouldn't sell for all the money in the world. But then it turned out, in the end, that the red heifer that he had became disqualified. It's very easy for it to get disqualified if it has two black hairs, or if it does, in the Talmud discusses, if it does a little bit of work, even minor work, like carrying an animal on its back, even like not a heavy animal. So it became disqualified. So I still think that he was right for not taking the deal. There's certain things you just can't sell, even if it doesn't work out. The fact that he didn't take the deal is a reflection of his holiness, so he could always say for the rest of his life he never sold out. Anyway, so that's the first thing. Take for yourself. Parah Adumah. So what is the concept of this red heifer? So we've been talking about how it's a purification process. But Rashi says the purpose of the red heifer, based upon this midrash, was to atone for the sin of the golden calf. And it's a parable can be compared to the son of a maid. A maid was hired to clean the palace of the king, and she brought along her son to work. And guess what happened? The son dirtied up the palace. And so the king said, let his mother come and clean up his mess. So to here, the Parah, the mother cow, should come and clean up for the mess of the calf, of the golden calf. So right away we see that this is going to be considered at the forefront of everyone's mind is the story we read last week, which is the story of the golden calf. Now, it has to be Parah Adumah, a red cow. Really, the red is like reddish brown. Now, it's not like bright red. It's a reddish brown. And it's not like the red of Jeff's shirt. That's really red. It's like a reddish brown. And red symbolizes in the Talmud and the Torah, red symbolizes sin. And the red will become white. That's the symbolism of being purified for our sins. And Rashi says that sin is called red. The Imre Shefer explained because sin stems from man's physicality, and that's his blood. And so therefore sin is referred to as blood, which is as red, which is the color of blood. And this red heifer has to be tamima, has to be perfect. Why? Because it symbolizes the Jewish people who were themselves, we ourselves, our ancestors were perfect before the sin of the golden calf. And then we became blemished through the golden calf. So the cow is perfect because we were once perfect, and then we sinned. And so we're saying, let this red cow come, which is perfect, and atone for them so that they can return to their perfection. So we're seeing from this explanation that the red heifer is symbolically coming to atone for the sin of the golden calf. So even though in a purely formalistic manner, it's just purifying those who became ritually impure from in contact with a dead body. On a deeply symbolic manner, we view this ritual as providing us an atonement for the ultimate sin, the sin of the golden calf. And now we say back in verse 2, you have to take a calf that has never had a yoke on it. It never carried anything, has never worked a day in its life. So it can never have worked. Why? Because what's the symbolism here? The symbolism is because just as the Bnei Israel removed the yoke of heaven from themselves, we have to take some calf and that has never had any other yoke and devote it straight to God. And so that we only have the yoke of heaven. That's it. That's the symbolism. Only the yoke of heaven in our life. And we have to take it to Elazar HaKohen, in front of Elazar HaKohen. The ritual takes place in front of Elazar HaKohen. This is the only time Rashi says this in its literal explanation. The only time in the entire Torah that there was a mitzvah specifically to the deputy Kohen Gadol. Elazar was Aaron's son. And this mitzvah was, Rashi says, mitzvah was skan. The mitzvah was skan. It was a mitzvah only on the deputy. This was unique. Every other mitzvah was either only for the Kohen Gadol or for all Kohanim. This is the only time in the entire Torah that's a mitzvah straight for the deputy. And Rashi explains why. Because Aaron would have been disqualified. Aaron was not appropriate for this. Why? Because just like they gathered around Aaron for the golden calf, who was a Kohen, to make the golden calf, and because Aaron made the calf, this work was not done by him, because a prosecutor does not become a defense counselor. Ein kateger nasa seniger. This is a theme that the rabbis approach several times in the Talmud, We don't have the prosecutor become the defense attorney. That's why I'll give you a couple of examples. That's why on Yom Kippur, when the Kohen Gadol would go into the Holy of Holies, he only wears white and he doesn't wear his golden garments because of the sin of the golden calf. That's why a shofar does not come from a cow's horn, because again, we don't want the prosecutor becoming the defense attorney. We don't, when we're going to the moment of absolute purification, we don't want to remind ourselves and God of our sin. And so then what do we do after that? It says in verse 5 that Elazar the Kohen, the Kohen shall take, and the calf is slaughtered, or the cow is slaughtered, and then it's burnt in front of his eyes. This reminds us, says Rashi, of what happened to the golden calf. Keshem shenisraf egel, just like the golden calf was burnt as part of the purification process for the sin of the golden calf, so too this red heifer is going to be entirely burnt. And then in verse 6, it says, the Kohen takes the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the crimson thread and throws it into the fire. What's the symbolism here of the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the crimson thread? Rashi says these three varieties correspond to the 3,000 men who fell from the sin of the golden calf. There were 3,000 men who died, and so therefore we have three varieties. I want to say in passing, as my son's bar mitzvah this past Shabbos, and I'll quote to you something that this sin of the golden calf, I just want to say this, my father-in-law said the Shver, said it Dvar Torah to my son. I'll just share with you because it mentions this. It says, the sin of the golden calf is such a tremendous sin. It's just overwhelming. We see that this ritual, perhaps the most important ritual in the Torah, is entirely created, according to this midrash, to combat against the sin of the golden calf, which is considered the greatest national sin. And yet, how many people did this sin? Only 3,000 men. 3,000 men did this sin. Out of several million people who were there, 3,000 men did this sin. So why is it considered such a national sin? So the reason is because everybody else was just standing around watching. And their inactivity, their passivity is what allowed it to happen. That's the sin of not caring. We're just sitting this one out. I'll sit this one out. That's the sin of that. So anyway, let me pause for a moment before we continue to get a question from. Okay, so then Raj says, what's the symbolism of these three species, the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the crimson thread? The cedar wood is the tallest of all the trees. The hyssop is the lowest of all of them. It's a bush, and this is burning them with the crimson thread is a sign that the arrogant one who acted pridefully and sinned should lower himself like a hyssop and a worm. The word for crimson is tolat, which is a pun, can also be a worm, and that will achieve atonement. So the path to atonement comes through person recognizing that they need to be humble and humbling oneself. So ironically, I read this recently. Humility is the only mitzvah that one cannot actively do. One cannot say, I am going to be humble. Then you miss the point, because then you're not actually humble. So I mean, that's a separate point. Okay, so then it says in verse 9, and the man who is richly pure shall gather the ashes and place them outside the camp in a pure place, and this will be for assembly of Israel as a mishmeret, as a safekeeping, as a watching, for the water of the sprinkling, it's a purifier. So you're supposed to be a watchkeeping. What does that mean? The Rashi tells us why it's called a watchkeeping. Very important Rashi. He says, just like the transgression of the golden calf is kept for all generations for punishment, for there is no sin or there's no settling of accounts that doesn't have anything from the sin of the golden calf. Meaning to say, every sin that we're punished for contains within it a little bit of the sin of the golden calf. As it states, Ubiyom fakti ufakareti vigomer. The day that I'll make an accounting, I shall bring their sin to account. And just like the golden calf renders impure everybody who deals with it, so too does the cow render impure everyone who deals with it. And just as the Jewish people were purified through the golden calf's ashes, so too they'll become purified through the ashes of the red heifer. So again, this is the same theme of the golden calf, but Rashi says what it means for a watch is that this is our antidote to the sin of the golden calf. We have the ashes of the red heifer sprinkled upon us, and that will guard us for all of eternity. That will guard us all of eternity. So if you said yesterday, the question came up, I said, well, I can imagine them doing the red heifer, and somebody said, well, what's the point if we don't have a temple? The point is, it will still achieve a purification from the sin of the golden calf. And this is a purification process. Most of us probably feel like, well, I didn't do anything for the sin of the golden calf. So what am I going to, why do I need this? Right? Why would I need this? I didn't do anything for the sin of the golden calf. But the answer is, first of all, that our faith teaches that it's one long generation, that we are one long generation. And just like we get the merits of our ancestors, so too we also have to fix any of their mess ups. And so therefore, by getting these ashes sprinkled upon us, we're providing a purification for the actions of our ancestors. Okay, so this is the way Rashi explains this. This is the way Rashi explains the concept of the red heifer. The red heifer is called Chukat Torah, which is a chok. A chok is an unknowable mitzvah. That's the way the rabbis understand a mitzvah, which is beyond the rational. So I have a lot of Hasidic explanations I want to share with you, but first, let me just share a couple of ideas. Hold on one second. Okay, so there's a lot of ideas and Rabbi's Chumash that talks about this. So there's a few explanations. The Ramban says, why is this mitzvah called a chok? Why is the red heifer the chok of the Torah? There is actually other laws that are chukim in the Torah. There's other laws that are called, but this is the chok of the Torah. So again, Rashi says that the nations of the world are going to taunt the Jewish people over this commandment. And they'll say, what purpose does it have? And so the Torah uses to say it's a personal decree. You have no distinction, you have no permission, like we said, to challenge it. Nachmanides writing in the 13th century, says the reason why it's called a chok is for the same reason why the scapegoat, the Sa'ir Azazel, the goat that sends out the Azazel, is also people make fun of that commandment. The Ramban has a whole very, 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 very opaque commentary on the scapegoat, on the Sa'ir Azazel. He says, but these are two animal slaughterings that take place outside the Beit HaMikdash. The only two are the scapegoat, which is not actually slaughtered. It's really sent down into the wilderness and possibly possibly thrown off the cliff in the time of the Talmud, and the red heifer. So now we go to the Be'er Mayim Chayim. Hold on, let me just tell everybody a little bit about the author of the Be'er Mayim Chayim, a Hasidic explanation. Hold on, let me just look up his Wikipedia entry. Hold on. Okay. It's let me just read. Okay, here he is. So the Be'er Mayim Chayim is written by Reb Chaim of Chernowitz, who lived in Ukraine. He was born in Ukraine in 1740 or around, and he died in Jerusalem in 1817. He was a pupil of the Maggid of Mezrich. So that means he's a contemporary of Rebbe Elimelech. And he was a rabbi in 5 different towns: Mogilov, Chernowitz, Patsani, and finally settled in Yerushalayim. And he founded the first Jewish hospital in Jerusalem. And he died in Jerusalem in 1813, and he was buried in Safat. Okay, so the Be'er Mayim Chayim says that the big problem with this law is that the people who are pure, the pure who are involved in this process, become impure, whereas the impure person becomes pure. And he gave an example from nature. What's the example from nature? We see that heat, he says, softens tin and yet hardens an egg. So certain things respond to heat by becoming softer, and other things respond to nature, to heat, by becoming hard, by cooking them. I offered, there are a lot of different explanations of this, but I offered a explanation in our discussion yesterday, which was that in order to help somebody, you have to become a little bit like them. So if you want to help somebody who's impure, you have to relate to them. So for example, if somebody wants to help at-risk youth, the way to connect to them is to, let's say, go to their music festival, go to their concerts, which might not be the purest place in the world. They might be smoking, let's say, certain drugs. And so you'll be in the area and you'll have contact high. I mean, you'll be around it. So you'll become a little bit impure, or you'll be a little bit more impure in your process of working with them and trying to teach them about the proper path in life. So it's the case in life that the impure person, while he's trying to help other people become pure, he will necessarily, in order for him to be effective, he will himself have to become more impure. That's one of the ideas here. The Orach Chaim says that, so he says, why does it say Zos Chukas HaTorah, as if to say that this is the representative of the entire Torah. So therefore he says that this is a paradigm, and this is the model of the entire Torah, because by receiving the Torah, the Jewish people became a holy people, and so therefore they became an attraction for spiritual impurity. It's only by becoming pure that you could also become impure. So ironically, a Jewish body becomes ritually impure only after the departure of the soul due to the body's holiness, which attracts impurity, like an empty jar of honey that attracts flies and insects. Meaning saying, why is the dead body considered impure? Because once the soul departs, then the body attracts impurity. And also, he says, if a person keeps this one mitzvah, it's as though he's kept the entire Torah. Because observing a mitzvah which makes no sense at all demonstrates a person's faith and commitment to observe all the other commandments. That's a very powerful reason why when this red heifer is offered, we should run to do it. We had an example in the Talmud yesterday about the body and the soul each tried to claim to God that they shouldn't be punished. The body said, I shouldn't be punished because without the soul, I'm doing nothing. I'm just like a stone. And the soul says, I shouldn't be punished because without the body, I wouldn't sin. So the Talmud says, we'll give you like a parable that there was a person who was unable to walk, and he was in charge of watching an orchard together with a person who was unable to see. And so the person who was unable to walk said to the blind man, I see some beautiful dates over there. Put me on your back and take me there. And together we'll be able to enjoy the food. So the blind man put him on the back, and they got the dates and they ate them. And so when the owner of the orchard came back, he said, you guys owe me money for the dates. So they said, the blind man said, I can't even see that. And the lame person said, I can't even walk there. So the owner of the orchard said, I'm going to put the lame person on the back of the blind man, and now together I'll be able to judge you as one. So that's just a message about that. So now that we gave those explanations, let me share the explanation of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says like this. He says, the Lubavitcher Rebbe says that there's a distinction between the explanations of Rashi here and the explanation of Rashi in the beginning of Acharei Mos, and also in Toldos. In the beginning to Parashas Toldos, Rashi defines a chok as something which the evil nations of the world argue against. Where does he say this? He says this in Genesis 26:5. Let me just pull it up there in Genesis 26:5. That's referring to it says that Avram followed God's chukot. So there Rashi says, what's an example of this chok? That things which the evil inclination and the nations of the world say there's no reason. And there Rashi gives an example of other chokim. What are they? Eating pig and wearing shatnez. Not wearing wool and linen. You're not allowed to wear wool and linen, and you can't eat pig. Rashi says these have no explanation. They're called chukim. They're decrees of the king. And so also in Acharei Mos, Rashi gives those examples. Eating pigs, wearing shatnez, and also in Acharei Mos, he also adds this mitzvah of the red heifer. And we have no right. But here, Rashi says it a little bit differently. Here the people say, like, what's the purpose? And people answer, God says, it's my personal decree. So here, there's a slight distinction. In the earlier cases, Rashi was saying, you have no permission to not do it, or you have no permission to exempt yourselves. Here, Rashi is saying, you have no permission to question it. Not that we would ever exempt ourselves, but we could say, you could say, oh, this is a stupid law. You ever hear anybody say that about one of the laws? Chas v'shalom. You ever hear anybody say that about one of the laws of the Torah? You ever hear anybody say that? Oh, this one's stupid. Can you imagine? If you ever hear anybody say that, read them this Rashi. You have no permission to question it. So there's a few distinctions. In the previous instances, it says that what's the reason that we might question it? It's our evil inclination. Here, Rashi says it's the Satan. There's a slight difference. In the previous Rashis, that the text says that they were arguing against them, but here Rashi says the Jewish people are caused grief by it, and here Rashi says that you have no permission to even challenge it, whereas earlier he says you have to do it. So what's the reason? So this is what the Rebbe says. He says that the reason why the red heifer is considered to be the example of a beyond rational commandment is because it gives a message which is fundamental to life. By the way, the Rebbe gave this 35 years ago. What year would that be? 35 years ago? Hold on. 19. No, not 35 years. Yeah, 35 years ago. So he gave it in 1989. 89. So this might have been one of the last lectures he ever gave. He got very sick. I forget what year he had the stroke, but it would have been soon after this. When did he have the stroke?
1991 or something.
91 he had the stroke. So he gave this right before the stroke. Like, this is one of the last lectures he gave. So the Rebbe said, so you see, so this one is one of the holiest because he had his whole lifetime leading up to this idea. So he says the spiritual root of all existence is rhythmic, meaning to say, just like a man's heart is always contracting and lungs are always inhaling and then exhaling, so too the universe's spiritual life force is in constant cycle of emanation and withdrawal. And so therefore, metaphysically speaking, everything is alive, being brought into existence constantly by God. And so its inner core is pulsating energy. The Kabbalists describe this as running toward and subsequent spirituality and then returning. And this is a deep idea, but anyway, excuse me. So the Rebbe says is that this red heifer is considered the central theme of Torah life. This is a very deep idea because it has this combination of running towards something and withdrawing, running towards and withdrawing. First, the cow is completely burnt, but then its ash is used to make water. And so and there's the pure and the impure. It's showing us like the yin and the yang of life, that you're running towards something, you do something, but then all of a sudden you start over again. And that life is not static. Life is not static. This is a very, very powerful lesson for all of us, that a person has to run towards God, but also take that energy that a person gets by running towards God and bringing it back into this world. You're not just supposed to be going, trying to go only higher. That's not considered to be a healthy spiritual approach. You have to go higher and then come back down into the earth. Have your time alone with God, but then use that time to interact with the human beings. This is the idea of the red heifer. That's what the Rebbe is saying. It's a very, very powerful idea. A very powerful idea about the red heifer. Does everybody follow what I just said, or you want me to repeat it? You don't follow it, Aya? Okay, so let me just repeat it. I'll say it one more time. I'll try to explain it.
I mean, for me, the red heifer, I know I'm not supposed to question the hook. I don't understand why it became a hook. I mean, they sinned with a golden calf and they paid for it. So is this a lifelong teshuva? Everybody has to continue remember the golden calf and do the red heifer. It seems even paganistic. It's
right.
like
you're not allowed to question it. Okay, Aya. So no, very good points, Aya. You're right. You're exactly right, Aya. Of course, Aya. You're exactly right. That's another explanation, that we can never forget the sin of the golden calf by always getting an atonement for it. But I guess the idea here is what I think the Rebbe is saying, Aya, and thank you for forcing us to go a little deeper here. What I think the Rebbe is saying is that life cannot be linear. So it cannot be linear. There has to be one step in one direction and then another step in the other direction, but that the step back in the other direction is informed by the higher level that we got to. So let's say, we'll go back to that example. Person is working with sick people, that you can't just, you get yourself to a higher level of immunity and you go back and you're going to become more impure, but you'll be stronger than before. So each time you're going to be bringing everybody else to a higher level. this concept of the red heifer. That's why you take the ashes and you burn it, you take away its life force, but then you mix it with water and sprinkle it onto the person. Anyway, that's what the Rebbe was saying. That's what the Rebbe he says it more here. He has more. He says as follows. He says, why is the red heifer kept as a reminder for the congregation? There's one of the lessons here is that when a person dedicates himself to reaching out and helping others, i.e. the purification of others, he may come to neglect his own spirituality. That's very important. I think he's talking to his students. So many of them were rabbis. He says, when you spend your whole life reaching out and helping others, you might neglect your own spirituality. To prevent such a mistake, the Torah teaches us to keep the portion of the ashes of the red heifer as a secure reminder that it's crucial to dedicate some time to oneself as well as to others.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Yes. Why choose a red heifer for this, what seems like a fairly important ritual? Why a red heifer, which one can argue doesn't exist, or if it does,
no, it exists now,
well,
Stanley.
Right,
it exists.
It exists in if it does exist by your own experience, it's a very small number. It's certainly not
right.
It's certainly not enough to carry on the ritual for a large number of people. So why pick a red heifer of all things? I mean, why not pick a donkey or something that exists in great numbers in nature that one could carry out this ritual? It seems to me that this ritual will always remain extremely obscure, because how many red heifers are going to be?
No, you're asking a great question, Stanley. And the simplest, Rashi did give us some of the answers. That on the one hand, the heifer reminds us of the golden calf. On the other hand, the red reminds us of the sin. So that's the two explanations of Rashi. But I think the deeper explanation also is that this is rare, and the rarer is makes it special. So let me just say they have idea here also. The Rambam writes that there were 9 red heifers in history from until the end of the Second Temple. The first was by Moses, the second by Ezra, and there were 7 from Ezra until the destruction of the temple. The fact that Rambam mentions that the 10th red heifer will be made by the Mashiach is understood because Rambam says that there will be many laws only applicable in the future era. But then he concludes this law with a prayer. May he be speedily revealed. So why does he say that? A legal code is not the place to for prayer. So Rambam is teaching us, one, that this is what the Rebbe said. Don't just believe in the Mashiach, but also actively await and yearn. Number 2, inevitably, feeling this void will lead a person to pray for the Mashiach's coming. And number 3, a person must yearn and pray for this Mashiach constantly. So he includes this in. Anyway, this is the idea that the yearning for the Mashiach. So now I wonder what the Rebbe would say about the fact that we actually have a red heifer today. I wonder what he would say about that. He wrote this Chumash before that we had a red heifer. Anyway, we'll stop here. I want to remind everybody that this afternoon you could tune in at 6:20